today's episode of Brand Bosses, we'll explore the highly successful 80s and 90s restaurant chain, Hooters. There's a good chance that even if you never visited one, you know what Hooters is all about. Great wings, cold drinks, and the Hooters girls. What actually started out as a prank that none of them thought would really amount to be anything other than a one-off restaurant, six friends with no experience running a restaurant will launch one of America's most infamous chains. Appropriately incorporated on April Fool's Day back in 1983, the six friends who launched Hooters were not seeking to create an iconic American restaurant at the time. Instead, they were just a bunch of fun-loving Midwestern transplants who wanted to create their kind of restaurant and who had managed to put together $140,000 to do it. The Hooters Six, as they would be known, were made up of Lynn Stewart, Ken Winmer, Dennis Johnson, Ed Droz, Gil Giantonio, and William Ranieri. Interesting to note, William was the oldest of the bunch by about 30 years, so he went by Uncle Billy. The Hooters Six didn't really have any experience to run a restaurant, let alone a successful one, but they knew what they liked. Wings, girls, and golden oldies on the jukebox. When the restaurant opened, it wasn't a big hit, not right away, but due to some great press and some good luck, things would soon pick up. In 1984, Tampa Bay was the host city for the Super Bowl between the LA Raiders and the Washington Redskins. Star running back at the time, John Riggins of Washington, stopped in for lunch at the Hooters the day before the game. Unfortunately, this would not lead to a victory for the Washington team as they would lose that Super Bowl. But that did not stop John from coming back in to the Hooters, this time with several teammates, to drown their sorrow in wings and beer. As a result of the media coverage at the time, Hooters quickly doubled their sales overnight, and the word got out to men far and wide. With business expanding, the six friends were looking to capitalize on their franchise opportunity. So when businessman Hugh Connerty walked into the Hooters and liked everything he saw, there was a deal to be made. And in 1984, the original owners, under the company name Hooters of Clearwater Incorporated, sold expansion and franchise rights to Hugh Connerty. Hugh would give the six co-founders $50,000, and they would continue to own the trademark rights and get 3 cents on every dollar the Hooters girls brought in. They would also keep the rights to build more Hooters locations in a 6-county radius of the Tampa Bay area. Connerty got the right to build Hooters everywhere else. He was required to stay faithful to every aspect of the Hooters, right down to the secret wing sauce, under the name Neighborhood Restaurants, which would later become Hooters of America. To help fund the project, Hugh approached Robert Brooks, a business acquaintance, for a loan. Brooks was rich, and he knew the restaurant business well. Many big chains bought from his food service company, Naturally Fresh. Now with the franchise rights and the capital, these two will go on to expand Hooters into a national brand. Within 2 years, Hooters had become a $16 million chain with 9 restaurants in Florida and 2 in Atlanta. Brooks, being the ambitious businessman he was, would gain full control of Hooters of America. Connerty was unable to pay on the loan, and as a result of the ensuing default, Connerty was pretty much out the door. Brooks' takeover stabilized one end of the business, but it unsettled relations with the founders. There was Hooters Inc. in Clearwater, the corporate entity owned and run by the original six, and there was Hooters of America in Atlanta, owned and run by Brooks. Brooks had the capital to push Hooters into new states, which the founders liked since they got a piece of every chicken wing sold. But it was a constant back and forth power struggle with Hooters Clearwater. Brooks was the type of guy who didn't like to take orders from anyone, let alone a bunch of unexperienced newbies. These issues would be a constant problem throughout their business relationship. Then in 1986, Hooters of Clearwater debuted the first ever Hooters calendar, thanks to co-founder Ed Droz. Ed was a major role player when it came to shaping the Hooters persona. He's credited recruiting the actual first face of Hooters over on Clearwater Beach in 1983. As the story is told, during the Jose Cuervo bikini contest, Ed bet the others that he could convince the winner to become the first Hooters girl. A young woman by the name of Lynn Austin was the winner. Initially, Ed gave her a business card, just in case her job at the telephone company didn't work out. And as fate would have it, the telephone company refused to give her time off for a bikini contest only a few weeks later. So Austin quit and joined the Hooters team. Austin was the prototype of the Hooters girl. She was an approachable All-American, the girl next door type. Austin's face began to appear on billboards for Hooters, making her a celebrity in her own right. Austin parlayed this fame into becoming a Playboy Playmate in 1986. And since then, Austin had made several television appearances, hosted radio shows, and podcasts. During the 80s and 90s, Hooters was able to branch out into new markets with Hooters Night Owl Theater, a television show hosted by Lynn Austin. The show actually ended up ranking number one in this time slot. The show was syndicated in 13 major markets nationwide. Later on, it will go on to be renamed Hooters Movie of the Week and began to beat out all of this competition in its afternoon time slot, including baseball. The show will go off in 1995. In 1991, Hooters Restaurant Clearwater and Hooters of America had revenues of more than $1 million. And in another smart partnership, Hooters of America president Bob Brooks struck a deal with driver Alan Kowinski. The two cut a deal for the last NASCAR race in 1991 in Atlanta. The great exposure blossomed into a full sponsorship the following year. In 1993, 10 years to the day of Hooters' first incorporation, tragedy struck. While on a promotional trip carrying the Hooters colors, NASCAR driver Alan Kowinski, sponsored by Hooters, along with Mark Brooks, Bob's son, and two others, all perished when their plane crashed outside of Bristol, Tennessee. Then in 1994, things got pretty intense between Brooks' Hooters of America and Hooters Clearwater. Brooks was tired of making big investments in his restaurants and still having to argue about how he could run the Hooters. So he leaped at the opportunity when one of the co-founders, L.D. Stewart, offered to sell his shares of Hooters Inc. Brooks agreed to pay Stewart $10 million for his 51% stake. But since Stewart owned just 2 of the 7 voting shares of Hooters Inc., others needed to be won over. They were instead enraged because under the original agreement, they had the right of first refusal to buy Stewart's shares. And in 1995, a Florida judge blocked the sale of Stewart's stake. The 5 got back the stock and retained control of Hooters Inc. If there was one thing that could stop the back and forth between the two sides, it was the common enemy, the EEOC. A U.S. federal agency filed a complaint against Hooters with charges of its exclusive employment of women as waitresses and how it discriminated against men. Now, I don't know about this, but I don't really even know why a guy would want to be a waiter at Hooters. But either way, in typical Hooters fashion, Hooters of America hired Vince, the Hooters waiter, a hairy male actor, and dressed him in a Hooters waitress outfit to poke fun at the allegations that Hooters restaurant discriminated against men. Hooters of America ran full-page advertisements showing Vince in USA Today and in the Washington Post. This would be great press for the chain and only grew their brand when television reporters showed up at several different Hooters locations around the United States to do local stories. Hooters of America like to boast that Hooters is to chicken wings what McDonald's is to hamburgers. But the Hooters girls were always the essence of the Hooters concept. Hooters restaurants hired young, attractive women as waitresses and dressed them up in orange running shorts, sized to fit comfortably. Hooters issued a statement at the time stating, "While we offer famous wings and burgers, the essence of our business is the Hooters girls and the experience she provides to our customers. Hooters girls are entertainers. They audition for their roles, and once hired, they must maintain a glamorous appearance and sing, dance, and engage the customers to provide a unique Hooters experience." As it turns out, mandating that entertainers look a certain way actually complies with BFOQ requirements, which is how the restaurant has continued to hire mostly female staff that looks a certain way. The late 90s into the 2000s were Hooters' peak time. They owned an arena football team, had a racing tour, a pro golf tour. They even had their own airline, Hooters Air, all complete with 2 Hooters girls aboard every flight. But towards the end of the 90s, the co-founders found themselves back in the courtrooms again with Hooters of America, alleging that Brooks had committed various violations with the license agreement. All the back and forth was beginning to be too much. The original co-founders sold the trademark rights to Brooks for $60 million. They retained the rights to the Tampa Bay and Chicago territories, along with Manhattan. And they retained the right to develop a Hooters hotel and casino in Las Vegas, and if they ever wanted to, bring Hooters to Hollywood. Hooters of America had domain over the rest, and under Brooks' leadership, the Collector Hooters brand expanded to more than 425 stores worldwide. In 2006, the original founders opened Hooters Las Vegas and Casino Hotel. The hotel would stay open for nearly 14 years, when in 2020 they sold off the casino. Hooters had peaked by the early 2000s in its popularity. Then in 2006, Bob Brooks would pass away. By 2008, they had 400 locations, and by 2011, 35 of them were closed down, losing $100 million annually. Upon Brooks' death in 2006, he owned a majority stake in Hooters, which was sold to Wellspring Capital before being rejected by Chanticleer Holdings, who had loaned the chain money. 5 years later, Chanticleer acquired the chain only to sell it in 2019 to Nord Bay Capital. In 2013, Hooters celebrated its 35-year anniversary, but the brand was on the decline. Unable to attract millennials as they were in the 80s and 90s with their parents' generation, the change in American culture and what's deemed offensive versus not has hurt the Hooters brand. In 2015, faculty from the University of Tennessee Psychology Department interviewed Hooters waitresses, some of all whom deemed admitting of dealing with some degree of depression, anxiety, anger, confusion, and feeling of degradation. They also reported feeling demeaned on a regular basis. According to Business Insider, a meta-analysis from a well-known adults-only site revealed some changing taste in adult entertainment. When it came to the searches of people between the age of 18 and 24 years old, they were the least likely to be looking for entertainment that was, well, breast-centric. The young generation just isn't as impressed by women in low-cut shirts as their elders are. Millennials in particular are abandoning casual dining restaurants in favor of fast casual chains like Chipotle, meal delivery services, and trendier new chains like wine bars. Another setback was Hooters was slow to update the food. The menu wasn't updated until the 30th anniversary when they brought in a new chef with some actual fine dining experience. And he wasn't impressed with how they had been doing things. Apparently, when Chef Greg Brickman arrived, the most important tool in the Hooters kitchen was the scissors. The wings were frozen. The burgers were frozen. And that's just not how you could do it in today's day and age. In an era of social media and celebrity chefs, people just want to get more for their hard-earned dollars. And Hooters spent far too long coasting on the idea that people were actually going there for just their food. Things may finally be turning around for the infamous brand. In response to declining sales, in 2019, the company launched a fast casual spin-off of its format called Hoots. Hoots is distinguished from its original concept, primarily by a reduction in menu items and employment of both men and women who are modestly dressed in t-shirts and khakis. During the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, these units turned into virtual brands that were quite successful. So that's all for today. Thanks for tuning in. I'd love to hear what you got to say in the comments. What do you think about Hooters? Have you ever been to their second chain, Hoots? How would you rate their world famous wings? I'd love to hear what you got to say. Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button for more videos to come. This is Brand Bosses, signing off. We'll see you next time.